the typical prospective patron doesn't know a lot of things that we as administrators assume they know. And that right there is a big barrier to entry. Hey everybody, this video is a recording of an interview that I did with The Observer. There are things in here that I have neither spoken about publicly before or written about before. Things like why I think the for-profit orchestra model wouldn't work. Things like what do we do about the perception that our core audience wants Brahms and Beethoven, and is that real or is that actually only perception? If you want specific topics, in the first comment here I've listed topics and timestamps so you can jump to whatever you want to hear. I hope you like it.
I had a long conversation at lunch actually with the newly appointed, relatively newly appointed president of the Minnesota Orchestra. You know, her perspective is all about innovation and trying new things and collaboration, not only with cross genre, but everything from doing cooking shows on stage and all kinds of stuff. And I guess I just wonder whether that's a sustainable model.
I have so many thoughts on all of this. A lot of what I'm going to share with you is just these opinions built up over 15 years now in this industry. I think a few different things here. I think one, it is not a programming problem. And all of these things that you suggested that other organizations are doing, the cooking on stage, the breweries in the hall, all of that, it's not that any of that's bad. It's just that the research shows and the data shows again and again and again that those people do not come back to our core repertoire. So when we're talking about the challenges of the industry, you are correct. That is a real problem. So my theory is that, and I have research to back this up that I can share about, but my theory is that the music itself is not the problem. The music is what we do best. I mean, the core repertoire, the masterworks, and we're talking, as you said, and as Robert Friedman said, that the quality of the musicians and the level of talent we have on stage is so amazing because the supply is so incredible. So it's not the product. And yet, so many organizations think if we just change the product, if we change this, if we do this programming instead, then then that's gonna somehow change things. And again, the data shows that that is not what's happening. So I've developed this theory that is proving true, at least here at the California Symphony, which is that the music is not the problem. The art is exceptionally high quality, and so it's everything else tangential to the experience that is what in fact is keeping people away. So to go more specific on that, that then touches on a lot of things, and these are the things that are hard for us to hear as arts managers. I think comparatively it's much easier to have a conversation about programming versus the experience and culture that we've created is not welcoming and uninviting. That's a much harder conversation to have. But that's what we learned. So we did
What do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, so to give you an example, we did a research project here, user experience research in 2016. It's called the Orchestra X Project, and we invited a bunch of newcomers and said we want people who quote unquote should go to the symphony but don't, meaning we want people millennials and Gen Xers who are smart, culturally aware, they have expendable income, they do go to other live entertainment options, but for whatever reason they don't go to the symphony. We said, if that's you, we want to hear from you. So they came to some concerts. One concert in particular was required so that it was a shared experience from which to have a focus group discussion. And what we learned from that group, again, smart people, culturally aware, they have the money. I mean, these are the people we want in our halls. They said, that's what became clear, is that the music wasn't the problem, it was everything else. So they didn't know when to applaud. They wanted to bring drinks to their seats. They said, your website reads like Inside Baseball. It's written for an aficionado. I'm smart, but I'm not an aficionado because, and this was the realization I had, we as a field, and I was part of this too, we preach that the decline in music education in this country is a big reason why we are seeing attrition in our audiences. And yet I realized I had done nothing to change the way I talk about what we do, to talk about the product. And so for me, that was very eye-opening to see that, that's part of making somebody feel not welcome when there's a bunch of vocabulary words that they don't know. And that starts on the website. That's way before we even make the sale that people are getting turned off. So it's things like that where there's just this whole culture associated with what we do. I think it's also challenging as an arts administrator. We are so close to this all the time. So another example is this group, again, very smart people. Not everybody knew all the names of the instruments in the orchestra. And yet for me, somebody who's been in this business my entire professional career, plus played an instrument very seriously growing up, I mean, I can't remember not knowing the names of the instruments in the orchestra. So it was a really, really eye-opening for me that the typical prospective patron doesn't know a lot of things that we as administrators assume they know. And that right there is a big barrier to entry. So there's that. We talked about window applaud and they don't know and things like that, and how awkward it is to feel when somebody's shushing them, or, you know, the first movement of a really great symphony ends and they want to erupt out of emotion in response to what they've just heard, and we're suppressing that, which is also very bizarre because this window applaud stuff is new for classical music, relatively speaking. I mean, this is a 20th century construct. This was never true to the origins of the art form. So anyways, we've reversed all of that here. We say clap when you like what you hear, and yeah, people love it. They go crazy. So, and I think that has definitely helped with our retention rates. Let's see, what else can I tell you? Diversity. Somebody in this group said, look, I came here to experience culture, but the lack of diversity made it feel really uncultured. And I thought, ouch, you know, I'm at a crossroads. I can listen to that feedback or I can ignore it and stick my head in the sand, you know? And so we've done a lot, and I said, no, we gotta do something about this. And so we've done a lot on the diversity front. We've made a commitment publicly of, you know, at least 20% of the composers we program will be underrepresented, either living composers, female composers, or composers of color. And in fact, at least one of those will be on each season. So we've done that for a couple years now in response to that feedback. We started running ads in Spanish. Our community here is about 25% Hispanic and Latino. So we started running ads in Spanish on Facebook, targeting Spanish speakers. I now make welcome remarks from the stage in English and in Spanish, just a sentence or two, just enough that I can, like, you know, eke out not being a native Spanish speaker or not being bilingual. You know, and lo and behold, in doing that, having programming that's more representative of our community, having ads welcoming those people, and then saying a couple words, literally welcoming them, we've seen a 50% increase in Latinx audiences. So it's things like that. I'll also say in terms of age, you know, everybody in this business says, we need new audiences, we need younger audiences, and yet the statistics show that we are collectively pretty good at attracting new audiences. We do roll out programming that gets new people in the hall. Where we struggle is to retain them. And if we look at our databases, we would see we have extremely high no return rates. As high as 90% is the national statistic, straight from the League of American Orchestras. So that's a real problem. It's not attracting new people, it's retaining them and getting them to come back again. And all the research shows that if we can get somebody to return for a second visit within 12 months of their first visit, their lifetime value and loyalty to the organization is going to skyrocket. So we've made that a huge focus here. And this is all, again, regardless of age. If you're a newcomer, we do a lot of things to invite people back. And that means also we don't solicit them for a donation or these other things that are sort of like, you know, asking somebody to get married before we've dated for a while, right? You know, we try really hard to say no. We're going to develop this relationship over time and treat people like people. And for a newcomer, that means we just invite them back again. And so we've got this whole plan, no matter who you are. If you're a new subscriber, we've got a whole set of things we do for that group, because that's another alarming statistic, is that nationwide about half of new season ticket holders don't renew. And we said, okay, we got to do something to work on that. Something about their experience as a first-year season ticket holder isn't working for them. But also the data shows by the time somebody is a second year, and especially by the time they renew for a third year, they're super loyal. So it's like, all right, it's just that first year hurdle we got to get better at. So we've done a whole lot of things here to try to help that group renew. Anyway, so I guess what I'm trying to say is we've been really systematic about all of these other things that are keeping people away. And it's not to say we haven't focused on programming and haven't focused on the music, because we have done a lot in terms of representation and diversity, but we didn't start there. We started with everything else. And then when all of those other things were in order, then I would say that liberates us in terms of programming. Now my music director, we know we've built an audience that is coming and coming back, and it frees him to program more of the things that he wants to program. Oh, and I got to add into this marketing. Sorry, now while I'm on the soapbox here, this is another issue. I think so often with orchestras, the marketing and orchestras of all sizes, including the biggest organizations in this business, the marketing is not on trend with what is happening in terms of other industries and in terms of consumer behavior. And, you know, you go to these websites and the price.
Why is that, do you think?
I think because people don't know. I think that there's a couple reasons. I think as a general statement, a lot of marketers in this field don't know what's on trend. Like, they're still doing things that they're trying to keep up with the turn of the 21st century. Well, it's almost 2020. We're 1/5 of the way done with the 21st century, you know? So we're 20 years behind other people and other industries in this regard. You know, some people, the website, it's not even that even some of our biggest orchestras, the website is not fully mobile friendly. Like, you can't even access the full version of the website on mobile. Or the ticket path is really clunky on mobile, sometimes on desktop too. And these are things that are costly to address. This is another, I would say, barrier to improving these things for our patrons, but and a lot of times we don't have the money at any size organization to address those issues. And then we sort of sweep it under the rug thinking, well, these things, they're too hard of problems to address. And yeah, these are big problems. If we had a much better online experience, we would sell more tickets, period. It's just that we're not meeting people where they are and what the expectation is in terms of what consumers want from businesses that have a price point similar to ours. I mean, that's what we also got to remember. Orchestras, that ticket price is not cheap. And so, yeah, we got to deliver on the value proposition that people are expecting in conjunction with that price.
What would you say about one of the arguments or issues that I've heard raised in talking to people about this issue is, you know, it's great to be diverse and have, you know, either female composers, folks of color, but at the end of the day, you know, when people talk about diversity, sure, it's nice to know that the guy who composed the piece you're listening to was from Argentina or Brazil and not from, Vienna. But at the end of the day, when they look on stage, they see very few people of color, and they look around in the audience, they see very few people of color.
That's right.
And then the second question I had is, when you start putting in, like, let's say, throwing out names here, like a Vila Lobos composer, you know, the people that are your Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, hardcore fans, they don't like that stuff. Particularly when it's like more modern music. I mean, I come from a family where both of my parents are lifetime supporters of the symphony, and they don't listen to anyone who hasn't been dead at least 80 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So,
right.
Then you have, and these are the people who are the patrons of these symphonies and that give a shell out the big bucks. And so they see it moving in a direction they don't like. So how do you solve that conundrum?
Yeah, okay, so there's two sort of questions here, I think. The first is on the diversity. You're right. It is not helpful to our cause. It's not helpful to diversifying our patron base if, when somebody comes to the concert hall, nobody looks like them on stage or in the audience. You are absolutely right. So what we've tried to do at the California Symphony, at least to combat that, is when we made this public commitment to diversity, we made it across every facet of the organization, and that meant different steps for different facets of the organizations. I mean, you're right. It's one thing to talk about the artists or the composers we're going to program. Yes, we did that. And also we said, okay, for the audience, you heard me say, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to start advertising in Spanish because that's the biggest constituency here in our community outside of white Caucasians. We said, in terms of the artists on stage, for every guest artist we look at bringing, for every white male, we are looking at bringing a female, a person of color. Same thing for guest conductors. For the musicians in the orchestra, this is more difficult difficult and positive, sort of double-edged sword here, because of blind auditions and our collective bargaining agreements. So blind auditions, we leave the screen up until the very end. Some orchestras take it down in the last round, which sort of allows for some unconscious bias to creep in. We keep the screen up all the way to the very end. we have made public on every job description, whether it's for the orchestra or in the office, we invite Alana candidates to apply. And I forget the whole acronym. Alana is, I think, Asian, Latino, African American, Arab, I'm forgetting one of them. Anyways, but we invite underrepresented ethnicities and heritages to apply, saying we see you and we want you to be a part of this team. And that alone has increased our applicants, both again for musicians for open positions in the orchestra and applicants for positions in the office. So, and then I went through this whole hiring best practices sort of revamp on my end of like, what am I doing to make sure I'm not letting unconscious bias creep in? How can I make sure that that first round candidate pool has more than one quote unquote different person in it? Because if there's only one, the research showed one black person or one female in a pool of all males, or all the research shows that one isn't going to do enough to diversify. But if we get that first round applicant pool more diverse, having multiple people of these underrepresented backgrounds, then the odds are one of those may advance. Things like that. Like I just looked at all the research on this and said, okay, for me too, Aubrey, you got to get this more correct in terms of making sure that I'm trying to do my part in diversifying my team. So anyways, diversity commitment across every facet of the organization. Same thing for the board. For every white male we bring on, can we please also add to that list a female we want to talk to, a person of color we want to talk to? Can we make it not just one? Can we bring on a class of new board members at once so we're not bringing on the one outside different person? Can we bring on a couple at a time so that there are strength in numbers, So anyways, all of that is the diversity question. It's never there's no silver bullet. It's work, and it's especially in an orchestra, there's a lot of different facets of the organization that we need to examine there. Your other question was the audience, and what do we do when sort of the core audience doesn't like the direction of the programming is the question I heard. So I think there's a couple of ways to approach this. One is, what I said about subscriber data is totally true. Once somebody has subscribed for 2 years and especially 3 years, those renewal rates are like over 90%, 95% renewal rate. So they're not subscribing. I mean, that's just, they can complain all they want, but they're not leaving. So I'll look at the data any day of the week over anecdotes some vocal minority is complaining about. Two, I think that there is no shame in programming strategically. So I think it is absolutely core to our mission that orchestras advance the art form by commissioning new works, by programming new works. That's imperative, I think. So what do we do when we know that there are some naysayers who don't like that? Well, I think there's no shame in programming the new commission next to a warhorse on a program. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think orchestras actually have a huge advantage over other performing arts disciplines. With an opera or a theater company, you have one thing on stage, one play, one opera. You don't have this opportunity to juxtapose the new and the old. So we have that in our pocket, and I think we should do more of that. And instead, I tend to see and observe in this field this sort of siloed programming. These are our Pops concerts. These are our Masterworks concerts. This is our new music festival. And every time I see that, I just scratch my head. And then on the diversity thing, this is our Dia de los Muertos concert. And it's like, we program in silos and then wonder why people aren't coming to anything else. Here's the video game concert. Like, I just think it's so funny that we scratch our heads when we invite participation in a siloed way.
Do you think that the reason that a lot of this programming and marketing seems to be locked in a sort of 20th century mentality, is that because the creative marketing type people in this sector would you say that they're somehow isolated? Not isolated, obviously, but somewhat sequestered or in their own little world, and they're not really attuned to really where popular culture is moving?
Yes, absolutely. I think as a field, as an industry whole, whether we're talking marketing or some other administrative function, we are incredibly insular, and it's hurting us. And so when we're all looking to each other, it's funny, I get these calls all the time from different people in the industry. Sometimes it's marketing folks at big orchestras, sometimes it's peers of mine at small and mid-sized organizations. And on whatever the topic is, they're asking, what are other orchestras doing? And time and again, I find myself giving the advice, Don't look at what other orchestras are doing. Let's look outside of the field and take inspiration from elsewhere. That's definitely how I've been successful.
If you start off a board meeting saying, I was at the Cardi B concert last night and I saw some really interesting things, I mean, wouldn't you basically be thrown out of the boardroom?
So here's what's interesting about that example. Other board members do this all the time. Cardi B would be extreme because it's more particular to my generation, I guess is the case you're making, but other board members do this all the time. And this is a bias. I've written about this. We think our own experience is indicative of everybody else's experience. So whether it's Cardi B or some other performance somebody went to, they come in the next day and say, oh, you know what I saw? I think we should do this. Well, it's not, and this is why I'm so data driven, because it's not fair to say, well, I liked XYZ about that, therefore everybody else should too. Instead, what my MO would be at that board meeting is to say, by and large, across multiple entertainment experiences, you know what happens? People film with their phones. Like, that's not particular to Cardi B, that's true everywhere. We consume entertainment via our phone. Okay, that's something that the orchestra world does not allow. We go to concerts, and because of our collective bargaining agreements, usually the first thing we hear is, please turn off your phones. And it's sort of like, to me, it just feels almost rude. It just is asking me to do something that is so counter to the way I behave in any other entertainment situation. And that's another reason why then we think, why aren't these millennials coming back? Well, we completely changed the expectation of what their consumption habits should be. Of course that's isolating and off-putting to that group, So anyways, what I'm trying to say is I would always use the data.
Another issue that's come up from time to time is that some people have challenged whether the layout of a concert hall is actually ideal for the 21st century. The fact that you go in, you sit on a concert hall, and you look at a stage of people, and many of whom you can't see because they're behind other people. And others have suggested that maybe breaking out the orchestra and rethinking the concert hall might be part of the solution. Maybe each section, the string section, would be on a riser surrounded by people, by audience members. And then the reed section would be somewhere else. And the conductor would be in the middle, and create a much more immersive experience. And people say, well, these pieces, were designed with the mid-17th century mindset of a concert hall in Europe, and you need to respect that, and so on and so forth. But, what are your thoughts on that? Or do you think that's just a non-issue?
Yeah, oh gosh, a couple different thoughts on this too. This is a very, especially if we're talking about redesigning a concert hall, a very expensive solution to a problem that I've already rattled off a ton of other things that aren't nearly as expensive in terms of how do we address growing our audiences. So I tend to think in some ways that is a cop-out answer. Let's redesign our concert halls, because it's just not feasible for most to be able to do that. I also will say this idea of watching people on a stage, that's not that foreign, and that is done in other entertainment options. Any band that we see is on a stage. So that to me is not so far-fetched. We go to a movie theater, it's a screen in front of us, not so far-fetched. So I think that experience is not, because there are other entertainment options we consume that way, it's not that antiquated compared to a lot of other things we've already covered in this conversation. I will also say, though, we have done a special event here where we try to tinker with this in two different ways. One, just as you described, with the orchestra seating, being seated around the patrons. We have our annual fundraiser is called Symphony Surround, and we do just that. And the orchestra is spread out throughout. And yeah, it's a real challenge for the orchestra. I gotta hand it to them. They rehearse, and it's really hard when you're trained your whole life as a musician to listen to the people sitting next to you. And then now suddenly you're in a setup where, oh my gosh, the person I'm listening for is on the other side of the room, and there's gala tables in between, and these people are eating and drinking. Yeah, that's a really different ask of a musician. I will say the patrons love it. I would say it's not necessarily feasible to do at scale, because again, if we're, some of these orchestras, we're used to selling 2,000, 3,000 tickets a night. Well, you can't do that with tables and all that kind of stuff. Then it starts to really tinker with the income model. So then I go back to my previous comment of, I don't think in a list of priorities of what needs to change, that's that high on the list. But at least I can add that, yeah, patrons love it. It's super cool to be able to sit next to musicians. So then the other thing that we've done that sort of maybe is the compromise between these two is IMAG. I wish concerts had IMAG, because that then sort of gets to your point of like, how do you see somebody or musicians on risers or, you know, something like that. Whenever we've introduced IMAG at our special events, it is super cool because you get the close-up of some of these musicians that you just don't get from your seat in the house. And I feel like that's a really interesting compromise.
IMAG?
Yeah, IMAG is like, you've seen this at concerts, I'm sure you have, not orchestra concerts, but like going back to Cardi B as an example, any of those pop performers, you know, like the big screens that show what's going on. You know what I mean? And they just have cameras on her, and then even if you're in the nosebleeds, you can see. Like, why don't we do that at concerts?
Is that another union? Is that another union issue?
No, it's not union. It's expensive. It's more production cost. I would say it's not totally prohibitively expensive, but it just adds production costs to do that.
Another thing that a number of orchestras that we talk to are experimenting with is trying to reach out to a new audience by, say, for example, having, you know, Sir Mix-a-Lot came on stage and did a whole performance with an orchestral background.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the Minnesota Orchestra is thinking of doing that with Lizzo. Puff Daddy's done that in the past. And so, I mean, what are your thoughts? I don't mean only to say with hip-hop, but what are your thoughts in terms of these sort of cross-genre collaborations? Are they in the gimmicky realm, or is there a business model there?
I think it falls into the category of what we've already talked about, this siloed programming, where it's like, yeah, people will come to those performances, and they do not, the data shows nationwide, they do not come back to other repertoire. So what I would suggest, though, because I think these collaborations are super cool, and cross-genre collaborations almost always perform well, not just in classical music. Look at Old Town Road right now. Is it country? Is it hip-hop? Like, it performs well. Last summer it was Despacito. It's, you know, is it pop because it's what's his face, Justin Bieber, or is it Latino, or because of I'm forgetting the people he collaborated with, but you know what I mean? Like, cross genre always does really well. So I think in many ways this is not something that orchestras should ignore. But what I would say is, why does it have to be its own concert? Why can't we also put on that program with Sir Mix-a-Lot, with whoever, a warhorse? And then hopefully we're saying to people, see, it's all music. And we as an orchestra and an institution value all music and all people who create that music. And we want to showcase all of it and the incredible breadth of what an orchestra can do. That's what we want to put in front of our audiences. To me, that then gives us a chance of maybe getting those people to come back to something else. I don't mean to be super buzzwordy, because I kind of hate that stuff, but the idea that all of us across the entire country should take from not just Silicon Valley but other industries too is this idea of iterative design. And yes, it is okay to test something and fail, or test something and learn, okay, parts 1, 2, and 3 about that worked pretty well, but part 4 we really got to tweak it to do it better next time. Or we're going to test this on a smaller scale before putting tons of resource behind it when we roll it out next time. You know, that approach, I think orchestras must embrace, because we need to innovate and we need to be trying new things, because if we don't, we're done. So call it a buzzword, call it Silicon Valley. It's just an approach to running a business that we all need to embrace.
Another sort of Silicon buzz term. Is there sort of a open source coding for orchestra management, or is it very siloed? Like, you know, would you be willing to say, share beforehand with your colleagues across the country, hey, this is what we're trying this year, these are some things we're looking to see the data on, and then later on, here's all the results, and publish the data? Or is it very much like, well, I heard that so-and-so did this, and, you know, it's very anecdotal, and there's not a lot of time, there's not a lot of sort of sharing across the industry, despite the fact you guys really don't compete with one another whatsoever.
Yeah, okay. All right, again, two different kind of thoughts on this. One is there is information sharing, but in my opinion, not a lot of truly honest information sharing. And I think a big reason for that is actually coming from foundations. So the entire culture of getting funded by foundations and government grants is that when we go back to those institutions, any nonprofit, not just orchestras or performing arts organizations, when we go back to those institutions, almost always do we have to report a success. Otherwise, we will not get future funding. Very few foundations, some are changing their tune, but very few say, no, Success or fail, we just want to hear what you learned. Like I said, very few have that attitude. So by and large, we are trained that no matter what the project, no matter what the experiment, we better frame it as a success. And then that's what happens when we go to these conferences and we're talking to each other about what we've done. It is always presented as a success. And that's not helpful because we know it's not always successful. And then see previous comment of we're so insular, then other people are sort of looking at that too. And it's just this just very inward focused dialogue. 3 years ago, I started a blog to try to combat this. So if you look at my blog, I've tried to make it case study after case study of this is what we've done, this is what we've learned, this is like, so many bloggers in our industry talk just negatively about the field, and here are the problems, and here's what you guys should do. And instead, I wrote a blog saying, no, this is what we've done, this is what we addressed, this is how it played out. And so, yeah, I think you're right on. The information sharing is not there. No, there's not an open source manual of how to do arts management well. So I've tried to do, at least in my little corner of the universe, what I can to try to combat that.
Another question that came up is, just about every other form of entertainment that we've either alluded to or talked about directly in this conversation, and outside of, symphonies and orchestras and opera, I suppose. I mean, perhaps the playhouse, depending on that. Basically every other form of entertainment is a for-profit business. Whether it's, a professional tennis match, a Cardi B concert, a New York Giants football game, whatever it is, they're all organized for-profit entities. Do you feel that that's part of it? I mean, that's obviously the legacy, and I understand why that, the historical reasons for that are, but do you feel like maybe there could be, room for a private sector play in this space?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I don't know, because what comes to mind is how would that business model work? And this goes back to one of the things Bob Freeman said of there is so much supply. Oh my gosh, now I've got all these other opinions flooding in my mind. There is so much supply. So how could one institution monetize that in a way? Because ticket sales cover, 30 to 50%. 50% would be like on the very top end of what ticket sales cover. That's why we have to fundraise the other half of our budget, because ticket sales just don't cover the cost. So to make that for profit means that there's no fundraising and ticket sales do cover the cost. Unless we get really good at corporate sponsorships and that other type of revenue. But corporate sponsorships also across all industries are on the decline, including for profit. So, and nor do we have like the media contracts to offer mega sponsorship deals and things like that. So I'm not saying it couldn't be done. What comes to mind are all these big obstacles that I think make that really challenging. Oh gosh, what else was I going to say? The supply is so high. I know.
Other reason I'm asking that is I spoke to a very prominent, well-known, and I'm still trying to get it to go on the record, so that's why I don't want to share what his name is, but someone you would definitely know his name. I think New York-based ad guy. And he said to me that, imagine if you had an orchestral experience that was akin to a baseball game, where at the end of every piece there's, corporate sponsorship and, and there's, all these different things are monetized in ways that are just kind of an anathema in the nonprofit world, but are just, part and parcel of the for-profit entertainment model. Everything from the branding on the gift bag you get when you walk in. Because he said, the one thing that orchestras have is that they don't monetize. They have a captive audience for 1.5 to 3 hours of the most sort of highly musician people in a given community, very high disposable income, very wealthy. And people will pay a lot of money to get access to these people, whether it's people that are selling financial instruments and financial services, or whether it's high-end luxury automobiles or vacations or whatever it is. He said that the fact that they don't take advantage of this in any other than maybe they put an ad in the program or very basic 101 stuff. He said that he thought maybe that's part of the culture of being a nonprofit.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This is sort of what's flittering around in my mind is, I guess, a really chicken and egg question, because what I want, my knee-jerk response to that is corporate sponsorship is on the decline, period. So it's even harder and harder to get the sponsorship deals we used to have 5-10 years ago. Definitely in recession, pre-recession, that definitely is a tipping point in this for our business. But then going back to chicken and egg, I'm like, well, maybe we're doing something wrong. Maybe it's not fair to blame corporations for their decline in sponsorship. I don't know. Maybe there is something we're doing wrong in the way we're asking. Maybe, I don't know. It's an interesting question. And I don't want my instant reaction to be, no, it can't be done, because that's not my MO at all. So I don't know. I think it's really interesting. I will say though, in terms of when I look at my budget, this is sort of a very board member thing to say, like, go after corporations. But if we look at our budgets, we would see that like 70% of all of our income comes from individuals, whether that's a ticket sale or donation. It's almost all individuals, and any kind of institutional support, whether that's grants or corporate support, is such a smaller fraction of the budget. And so I get kind of aggravated when boards say, well, have we gone after such and such company? Well, who are you going to introduce me to, for one? Two, it's such a comparatively small fraction of where our support's coming from. My time is better spent cultivating major donors. I don't know, but then again, I go back to chicken and egg. Maybe if we had bigger staffs, then maybe we would have time to do that.
So this popped in my mind when you were talking about introducing the orchestra in English and Spanish. Have you seen a downside to skewing to a younger audience, endangering that support of older, more established clientele? Because I can imagine, and maybe like using Eric's example of football games, adding in a Spanish introduction would make some people mad, unreasonably so in my opinion. But I'm curious about what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I love this question, because I keep saying this, I always go back to the data versus like somebody complaining. So, people ask me all the time, what does your core audience feel about all these changes, which is sort of a version of the question you're asking now. And the answer is, one, again, the data shows those longtime loyal subscribers, they're not going anywhere. They are in. So and in fact, our subscriber base is growing. Our entire audience has doubled. So, and that's single ticket buyers and season ticket holders. And I forget, season tickets are up like 42% over the last 5 years. And so our subscriber base is growing. I mean, exactly. No other orchestra has those kind of stats right now. So whatever we're doing, it's working. And sure, there have been a few people who have come up to me. Nobody's complained about the Spanish, but there have been a couple who've said, if you tell the audience to clap when they like what they hear one more time, I'm out of here. Well, I'll take that deal. Double the audience and lose one or two cranky people who aren't part of this welcoming environment I'm trying to create. I will take that deal any day of the week. So there's that. In terms of the Spanish specifically, it's just, and younger audiences, it's just the opposite. Both longtime patrons and orchestra members have said to me, Aubrey, I see the change in our concert hall. There is a different energy here. We sell out our concerts. People are animated. People are excited to be here. Thank you. That's usually the answer I get. They know when it used to be half empty and dead and boring. And that's not the environment we've created now. So anecdotally, no, a few complainers. Too bad, because the data shows what we're doing is working. And by and large, most of the anecdotal data supports that people enjoy what they're seeing.